The dim lights of Murphy's tavern cast long shadows across the worn wooden floors, where the smell of stale beer and fried food hung heavy in the air. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun sat hunched over his third whiskey, his uniform jacket draped carelessly over the back of his chair. The amber liquid burned as it went down, but not as much as the memory of today's disciplinary hearing still burned in his chest. 3 months. 3 months of his life wasted on what he knew was a bogus investigation. Some pencil-pushing administrator had questioned his decision during a rescue operation in Afghanistan, where he'd chosen to save 2 wounded soldiers instead of securing a weapons cache. The hearing had dragged on for weeks, with suits who'd never seen combat questioning every choice he'd made in the heat of battle. Marcus ran his calloused fingers through his dark hair, trying to push away the image of Colonel Harrison's disapproving face as he delivered the final verdict. No formal charges, but a permanent mark on his record. 15 years of exemplary service. And now this stain would follow him forever. The promotion he'd been working toward for 2 years was gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. The tavern was busier than usual for a Thursday night. Military personnel from the nearby base mixed with locals, creating a chaotic blend of conversations and laughter that only made Marcus feel more isolated. He'd chosen this corner table specifically to avoid interaction, wanting nothing more than to drink away the bitter taste of injustice. As he reached for his glass, a commotion near the bar caught his attention. A woman in civilian clothes was trying to squeeze through a group of rowdy sailors who seemed determined to block her path. She was petite, probably in her early 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. Despite her small stature, she moved with a confidence that spoke of someone accustomed to being in charge. The sailors were clearly drunk, their voices getting louder as they made crude comments about her appearance. Marcus watched as she politely tried to excuse herself, her posture remaining straight and dignified despite their harassment. One of the sailors, a burly man with tattoos covering his forearms, stepped directly into her path. "Where you going, sweetheart?" the sailor slurred, his breath visible even from Marcus's table. "Night's still young. Why don't you let us buy you a drink?" The woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you, but I'm meeting someone. Please excuse me." Her voice was calm, controlled, but Marcus caught the slight tension in her shoulders. She tried to step around the group, but they shifted to block her again. The sailor who seemed to be their leader laughed, a harsh sound that made several other patrons turn to look. "Come on, don't be like that. We're just being friendly. You look like you could use some company." Marcus felt his hands clench into fists. The alcohol in his system mixed with his already volatile emotions, creating a dangerous cocktail of anger and frustration. He'd had enough of watching bullies get away with their behavior today. First the hearing, now this. Someone needed to stand up to these idiots. The woman tried once more to push past them, her patience clearly wearing thin. "I said excuse me," she repeated, her voice carrying a hint of authority that the drunk sailors completely missed. That's when the tattooed sailor made his biggest mistake. As she attempted to move around him, he grabbed her wrist, pulling her back toward their group. "Don't be rude, lady. We're trying to be nice here." Marcus was on his feet before he realized he'd moved, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the alcohol hit him, but his focus remained laser-sharp on the scene unfolding at the bar. 3 quick steps brought him within striking distance of the group. "Let her go," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command that 15 years in the military had ingrained in him. The sailors turned, and Marcus could see the calculation in their eyes as they sized him up. They saw his military bearing, the scars on his hands that spoke of combat experience, the cold determination in his dark eyes. But they also saw that he was alone, and alcohol had made them stupid. "Mind your own business, soldier boy," the leader sneered. "We're just having a conversation with the lady." The woman's eyes met Marcus's for a brief moment, and he saw something unexpected there. Not gratitude or relief, but a flash of recognition mixed with something that might have been concern. It was gone so quickly he almost thought he'd imagined it. "The conversation's over," Marcus said, stepping closer. "Walk away." The tension in the bar was palpable now. Other conversations had died down as patrons sensed the brewing conflict. The bartender, a middle-aged man with graying temples, was reaching for the phone behind the bar. The sailor released the woman's wrist, but didn't back down. Instead, he puffed out his chest and stepped toward Marcus. "Or what? You gonna make us?" Marcus had been in enough bar fights to know how this would end. The smart thing would be to de-escalate, to find a way to defuse the situation without violence. But the whiskey and his mounting frustration with the day's events had short-circuited his usual restraint. "If I have to," he replied, his stance shifting slightly to a more balanced position. The woman stepped forward then, placing herself between Marcus and the sailors. "Gentlemen, please. This isn't necessary. I can handle this situation." Her intervention caught everyone off guard. There was something in her voice now, a quiet authority that seemed to cut through the alcohol-fueled bravado. Even the sailors hesitated, sensing that they might have misjudged the situation. But Marcus was too far gone, his anger and frustration boiling over. All he could see was another injustice being played out in front of him, another situation where the wrong people were getting away with bad behavior. Without thinking, he placed his hand on the woman's shoulder to move her aside. "Ma'am, please step back. These guys need to learn some respect." What happened next would replay in Marcus's mind for months to come, as he gently but firmly pushed the woman to the side, intending to put himself between her and the sailors. She stumbled backward. Her heel caught on something, maybe a purse strap or a spilled drink, and she went down hard. The sound of her body hitting the floor was like a gunshot in the suddenly silent bar. Marcus stared in horror as she lay there for a moment, stunned, her neat bun coming undone and her dignified composure shattered. A thin trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth where she'd bitten her lip in the fall. The sailors, suddenly sober with shock, backed away from the scene. The tattooed leader held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Hey man, we didn't want any of this. We're out of here." They melted away into the crowd, leaving Marcus standing over the fallen woman with a growing crowd of onlookers. The bartender was already on the phone with what Marcus assumed was 911, his voice urgent but professional. Marcus knelt beside the woman, his hands shaking as he reached out to help her. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. Are you hurt? I didn't mean for you to fall. I was just trying to help." She pushed herself up into a sitting position, waving away his offered hand. There was something different about her now, a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried a weight that made Marcus's blood run cold. "Staff Sergeant Chun, isn't it?" The words hit him like a physical blow. In all the chaos and alcohol-fueled emotion, he hadn't considered that she might recognize him. But now, looking at her more closely, seeing the way she carried herself even while sitting on a barroom floor, a terrible possibility began to form in his mind. "Do we know each other, ma'am?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. She stood up slowly, brushing dust and debris from her clothes. Her movements were careful and controlled, but Marcus could see her hands trembling slightly. Whether from shock, pain, or anger, he couldn't tell. "We haven't been formally introduced," she said, accepting a napkin from the concerned bartender to dab at her lip. "But I've been following your case quite closely. I'm Colonel Sarah Mitchell." The name hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to the chest. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base's new commanding officer who had taken over just 6 weeks ago. The woman whose first major decision would likely involve reviewing his disciplinary hearing and determining his future in the military. The woman he had just pushed to the ground in a bar fight. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the full magnitude of what had just happened crashed over him. Not only had he potentially injured a superior officer, but he'd done it while drinking, in uniform, after intervening in a situation that might have resolved itself peacefully. "Colonel, I had no idea. Ma'am, I'm so deeply sorry. I thought those sailors were harassing you, and I just reacted. The alcohol, that's no excuse, but I wasn't thinking clearly." Colonel Mitchell studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. The bar had grown quiet around them, with everyone straining to hear what would happen next. Marcus was acutely aware that his career, already hanging by a thread after the hearing, was now probably over. "We'll discuss this later, Sergeant," she said finally, her voice professional but not unkind. "Right now, I think you should go home and sleep off whatever you've been drinking." She turned to leave, moving carefully but steadily toward the door. Marcus watched her go, his mind reeling with the implications of what had just occurred. As the door swung shut behind her, the normal sounds of the bar slowly resumed, but Marcus remained standing in the same spot, staring at the door. The bartender appeared at his elbow, holding out a glass of water. "Rough night, son." Marcus accepted the water gratefully, his mouth suddenly dry as cotton. You could say that. How much do I owe you? $23.50. But listen, I've been working here for 15 years, seen a lot of military folks come through. That woman, your colonel, she could have handled this very differently. The fact that she didn't call the MPs right here and now, that might mean something. Marcus nodded, pulling out his wallet with numb fingers. As he placed the bills on the bar, he tried to process what the bartender had said. Colonel Mitchell could indeed have had him arrested on the spot. Assaulting a superior officer, even accidentally, was a court-martial offense that could result in prison time, not just discharge. Outside, the cool evening air hit his face like a slap, helping to clear some of the fog from his mind. Marcus walked slowly toward his car, then remembered he'd been drinking and called a cab instead. As he waited on the sidewalk, he replayed the entire encounter in his mind, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent the entire day angry about being judged unfairly for a split-second decision made under pressure. Now he'd made another split-second decision that was infinitely worse than anything he'd done in Afghanistan. At least there, he'd been trying to save lives. Tonight, he'd potentially destroyed his own career and injured an innocent woman in the process. The cab ride to his apartment was a blur of streetlights and growing dread. Marcus stared out the window at the familiar streets near the base, wondering if this might be the last time he'd see them as a member of the military. By tomorrow morning, news of what had happened would likely have reached every corner of the base. His fellow soldiers would know that he'd pushed the new commanding officer to the ground in a bar. His apartment was a sparse, utilitarian space that reflected his years of moving from base to base. A few photos on the walls showed him with his unit in various deployments, smiling faces of men and women he'd served with, fought alongside, and in some cases mourned. Would those friendships survive the scandal that was about to engulf him? Marcus sat heavily on his couch, still in his uniform, and buried his face in his hands. The alcohol was wearing off now, replaced by a crushing sense of reality. He thought about calling someone, maybe his sister back in California, but what would he say? How could he explain that he'd thrown away 15 years of service in one moment of stupidity? His phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, his heart jumped, thinking it might be someone from the base with news about his fate. Instead, it was a reminder about a medical appointment he had scheduled for next week. The mundane normalcy of it struck him as almost funny. Would he even still be in the military next week? As he finally changed out of his uniform and into civilian clothes, Marcus caught sight of himself in the bedroom mirror. The man looking back at him seemed older than his 33 years, worn down by the events of the day. The face was familiar, but something in the eyes had changed. There was a defeat there that hadn't existed that morning. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep impossible despite his exhaustion. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Colonel Mitchell falling, heard the sound of her hitting the floor, remembered the look in her eyes when she'd said his name. The look that said she knew exactly who he was and what this meant for both of them. Tomorrow would bring consequences he couldn't yet imagine. The military justice system that had already put him through 3 months of hell would undoubtedly have even less mercy for what had happened tonight. But beyond the professional ramifications, Marcus found himself thinking about Colonel Mitchell as a person. She had been alone in that bar, probably just trying to unwind after what he imagined had been a long day of command responsibilities. She hadn't asked for his help, hadn't needed his protection, and certainly hadn't deserved to be hurt because of his inability to control his temper. As the hours passed and dawn began to creep through his bedroom window, Marcus came to a decision. Whatever happened next, whatever punishment awaited him, he would face it with dignity. He would accept responsibility for his actions without excuse or justification. It was the least he could do after failing so completely to live up to the standards he'd sworn to uphold. The morning would bring phone calls, meetings, and probably the end of the only career he'd ever known. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of his apartment, Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun began to understand that some mistakes change everything, and some moments can't be undone. The harsh buzz of Marcus's alarm clock cut through the fragile sleep he'd finally managed to find just before dawn. His head pounded with a combination of hangover and stress as he forced himself to sit up on the edge of his bed. For a brief, blissful moment, he wondered if the events at Murphy's Tavern had been nothing more than a vivid nightmare. Then, reality crashed back down on him like a ton of bricks. He'd pushed his commanding officer to the ground in a bar. Marcus stumbled to the bathroom, his legs unsteady as the full weight of his situation settled on his shoulders. The face that stared back at him from the mirror looked haggard, with bloodshot eyes and 2 days' worth of stubble. He looked like a man who'd lost everything, which, he reflected grimly, might not be far from the truth. The shower did little to improve his physical state, but the hot water helped clear his head enough to start thinking practically about what came next. He needed to report to base as usual, maintain his normal routine until ordered otherwise. Running or hiding would only make things worse, if that was even possible. As he shaved, Marcus tried to prepare himself for the reactions he'd face. By now, someone would have talked. The bartender, other patrons, maybe even the sailors who'd started the whole mess. The military rumor mill was efficient and merciless, especially when it came to scandals involving officers and enlisted personnel. His phone rang just as he was buttoning his uniform shirt. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Marcus hesitated before answering, wondering if it might be a reporter who'd somehow gotten wind of the story. Sergeant Chin speaking. Sergeant, this is Captain Williams from Colonel Mitchell's office. The colonel would like to see you in her office at 0800 hours. Marcus glanced at his watch. It was already 0730, which meant he had 30 minutes to get to base and report to what would likely be the most important meeting of his life. His mouth went dry as he tried to form a response. Yes, sir. I'll be there. Sergeant, Captain Williams added, his voice carefully neutral. The colonel asked me to inform you that this will be a private meeting. No need to bring representation at this time. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone. The fact that Colonel Mitchell wanted to meet privately was either a very good sign or a very bad one. Either she wanted to handle this quietly, possibly to minimize damage to both their careers, or she wanted to deliver his punishment personally before making it official. The drive to base passed in a blur of familiar landmarks that suddenly felt foreign and distant. Marcus found himself memorizing details he'd never paid attention to before. The way the morning sun hit the guard shack, the faded paint on the welcome sign, the precise formation of the flagpole in the center of the main courtyard. If this was his last day as a soldier, he wanted to remember it all. At the main gate, the guard checked his ID with the same professional courtesy as always. If the young soldier had heard about last night's incident, he gave no sign of it. Marcus took some small comfort in this normal interaction, even as he dreaded what awaited him in the administrative building. Colonel Mitchell's office was on the 3rd floor of the headquarters building, behind a door marked with crisp military precision. Marcus had never been inside, had never even seen her in person before last night's disaster. As he approached the outer office where Captain Williams sat behind a desk covered with neat stacks of paperwork, Marcus forced his breathing to slow and his shoulders to straighten. Sergeant Chun reporting as ordered, sir. Captain Williams looked up from his computer screen, studying Marcus with curious eyes. He was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in his late 20s, with the kind of earnest expression that suggested he took his duties very seriously. The colonel is expecting you, Sergeant. Please go in. The inner office was larger than Marcus had anticipated, with windows that offered a view of the parade ground where soldiers were conducting their morning physical training. Colonel Mitchell sat behind a mahogany desk that looked like it had been in military service longer than Marcus had been alive. She was reading a file, and Marcus noticed that her lower lip showed a small cut that hadn't been there before last night. She looked up as he entered, and Marcus was struck again by how different she seemed in her natural element. In the bar, dressed in civilian clothes and dealing with harassment, she'd appeared almost vulnerable. Here, in her dress blues with colonel's eagles gleaming on her shoulders, she radiated the kind of authority that came from years of command experience. Sergeant Chun, please sit down. Marcus remained standing, coming to attention as protocol demanded. Ma'am, I prefer to stand for this meeting. A slight smile crossed her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. I said sit down, Sergeant. That's an order. Reluctantly, Marcus lowered himself into the chair across from her desk. The silence stretched between them for several long moments as Colonel Mitchell continued reading whatever was in the file before her. Marcus caught glimpses of his own service record, documentation from yesterday's hearing, and what appeared to be an incident report dated today. Finally, she closed the file and leaned back in her chair, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Tell me what happened last night, Sergeant. Your version of events. Marcus had rehearsed this moment during the drive to base, but now that it was here, the words seemed to stick in his throat. He cleared it once and began trying to keep his voice steady and professional. Ma'am, I was at Murphy's Tavern last evening, off duty and in civilian clothes, though I acknowledge I was still wearing my uniform jacket. I had been drinking, which I know does not excuse my subsequent actions. I observed what appeared to be harassment of a civilian by several sailors, and I chose to intervene. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. During the intervention, I placed my hand on what I believed to be a civilian's shoulder to move her away from the conflict. I did not know you were a military officer, ma'am, let alone my commanding officer. When I moved you aside, you fell and were injured. I take full responsibility for my actions and offer no excuse for what happened. Colonel Mitchell listened without interruption, her face giving away nothing of what she was thinking. When Marcus finished, she opened the file again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is the incident report filed by the bartender at Murphy's Tavern. He states that he observed several sailors harassing a female patron, that you intervened on her behalf, and that during the altercation, the woman fell and was injured. He also noted that the sailors left immediately after the incident, and that you remained to ensure the woman was not seriously hurt. She set the paper aside and picked up another document. This is a statement from one of the other patrons, a retired Navy chief who happened to be there last night. His account corroborates the bartender's version of events. He specifically mentions that he observed you attempting to de-escalate the situation and that the woman's fall appeared to be accidental. Marcus felt a small spark of something that might have been hope, but he quickly suppressed it. Regardless of witness statements, he had still physically contacted a superior officer while under the influence of alcohol. Ma'am, I appreciate that the witnesses saw fit to provide accurate statements, but the fact remains that I made contact with a superior officer while intoxicated. I understand the seriousness of this breach of military discipline. Colonel Mitchell set down the papers and leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. Sergeant Shun, do you know why I was at Murphy's Tavern last night? The question caught him off guard. No, ma'am. I was meeting with Chief Warrant Officer Rebecca Torres to discuss the findings of your disciplinary hearing. Chief Torres was one of the investigating officers, and she had requested a private meeting to share some concerns about the process. Marcus felt his stomach drop even further. Not only had he assaulted his commanding officer, but he'd interrupted a meeting about his own case. The irony was almost too much to bear. Chief Torres was running late due to a family emergency. Colonel Mitchell continued. While I waited for her, I decided to review your service record one more time. 15 years of exemplary service, 4 combat deployments, numerous commendations for bravery and leadership, a record that any soldier would be proud of. She opened another file, this one thicker than the first. I also reviewed the incident that led to your hearing. Staff Sergeant, in my 22 years of military service, I have never seen a more thorough investigation of what should have been a straightforward case. You made a tactical decision under fire that saved 2 soldiers' lives. Yes, it meant abandoning the weapon's cache, but any reasonable commander would have made the same choice. Marcus stared at her, confusion mixing with his dread. This wasn't how he'd expected this conversation to go. The investigation was initiated by Lieutenant Colonel Bradford, who, as it turns out, had been hoping to secure that particular cache for his own unit's use. When you prioritized human lives over equipment, he saw an opportunity to discredit you and filed a formal complaint. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd suspected that there was more to the investigation than met the eye, but to learn that it had been motivated by petty politics rather than genuine concern for military justice was devastating. Chief Torres discovered this during her review of the case files. Bradford had been pressuring witnesses to alter their statements, suggesting that your decision had been reckless rather than heroic. When Chief Torres confronted him with evidence of his interference, he withdrew his complaint and requested a transfer to another base. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. 3 months of hell, 3 months of questioning his judgment, and his worth as a soldier, all because someone had wanted to play politics with his career. Ma'am, I don't understand. If the complaint has been withdrawn, why wasn't I informed? Because I hadn't made a final decision about how to proceed. Your case was the first major disciplinary matter to cross my desk since taking command here, and I wanted to be absolutely certain I handled it correctly. That's why I was meeting with Chief Torres last night. Colonel Mitchell stood and walked to the window, looking out at the parade ground where soldiers continued their morning training. What happened at Murphy's Tavern was unfortunate, but it also showed me something about your character that I couldn't have learned from any file or hearing. She turned back to face him. You saw what you believed was an injustice, and despite being off duty and under the influence, you chose to intervene. Yes, your judgment was impaired, and yes, you should have found a better way to handle the situation. But your instinct was to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Colonel Mitchell held up a hand to stop him. That said, your actions last night cannot be completely overlooked. You were drinking in uniform, you intervened in a situation without knowing all the facts, and you made physical contact with a superior officer. These are serious breaches of military discipline that require consequences. Here it comes, Marcus thought. The discharge papers, the end of his career, the destruction of everything he'd worked for. Therefore, I am issuing you a formal letter of reprimand for your actions last night. This will remain in your local file for 1 year, after which it will be removed provided there are no further incidents. Marcus blinked, certain he'd misheard. Ma'am, you heard correctly, Sergeant. A letter of reprimand, nothing more. The original investigation into your combat decision is being closed without any disciplinary action. In fact, I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star for your actions in Afghanistan. The room seemed to tilt around Marcus as he tried to process what he was hearing. From potential court-martial to a medal recommendation in the span of 10 minutes was more than his stressed mind could handle. I don't understand, ma'am. Last night, you made a mistake while trying to do the right thing. It's not the first time that's happened to a good soldier, and it won't be the last. The question is what you learn from it, and how you move forward. Colonel Mitchell returned to her desk and picked up one more document. There's one more thing, Sergeant. I'm offering you a position on my personal staff as a liaison between the enlisted ranks and command. It would mean a promotion to Sergeant First Class and a chance to help other soldiers who might find themselves in situations similar to what you've experienced. Marcus felt tears threatening at the corners of his eyes, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. After last night, I don't deserve. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Sergeant. This is about potential and the belief that good people can learn from their mistakes. The question is whether you're interested in the position. The answer came without hesitation. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Good. Report to Captain Williams on Monday morning to begin the transition. He'll brief you on your new responsibilities and arrange for your promotion ceremony. She stood, and Marcus quickly rose to attention. There is one more thing, Sergeant. I want you to understand that what happened last night will remain between us. The official record will show that you received a letter of reprimand for a minor incident involving alcohol. The details of our encounter will not be discussed. Ma'am, why are you doing this? Why are you being so understanding? Colonel Mitchell smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it was a warm, genuine expression. Because 15 years ago, I was a young lieutenant who made a similar mistake. I was fortunate enough to have a commanding officer who saw potential rather than just failure. I'm simply paying that forward. She extended her hand, and Marcus shook it, still struggling to believe how dramatically his life had changed in the space of one conversation. One last thing, Sergeant. The next time you see someone being harassed in a bar, call the MPs instead of taking matters into your own hands. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. As Marcus left Colonel Mitchell's office, he felt like he was walking through a dream. The hallway that had seemed so ominous an hour ago now looked welcoming and familiar. Fellow soldiers nodded to him in the corridors, unaware that they were looking at a man who had just been pulled back from the brink of losing everything. Outside the headquarters building, the morning sun felt warmer on his face than it had in months. Marcus stood for a moment on the front steps, looking out at the base that would continue to be his home, at the flag that would continue to represent his life's work. His phone buzzed with a text message from his sister in California. Haven't heard from you in a while. Hope everything's okay. Love you. For the first time in months, Marcus smiled as he typed back. Everything's better than okay. I'll call you tonight with some good news. As he walked toward his office to begin what felt like the first day of the rest of his career, Marcus carried with him a new understanding of leadership, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. Colonel Mitchell had shown him that true strength sometimes meant showing mercy, and that the best leaders were those who could see potential even in moments of failure. The road ahead would still require hard work and dedication, but now it was a road that led forward rather than to a dead end. And sometimes Marcus reflected that made all the difference in the world. 3 weeks had passed since that fateful morning in Colonel Mitchell's office, and Marcus was still adjusting to his new reality. The promotion ceremony had been a small affair, attended by close colleagues who had no idea how close he'd come to losing everything. As he sat at his new desk in the command building, wearing the additional chevron of a sergeant first class, Marcus often caught himself touching the metal insignia as if to confirm it was really there. His new role as enlisted liaison had proven more challenging than he'd anticipated. The position required him to act as a bridge between the command staff and the thousands of enlisted personnel on base, helping to address concerns, resolve conflicts, and ensure that the voices of ordinary soldiers were heard at the highest levels of leadership. Today's schedule included individual meetings with 3 soldiers who had requested to speak with someone outside their direct chain of command. Marcus had learned that these conversations often revealed problems that might otherwise fester until they exploded into major incidents. It was delicate work that required equal parts psychology, military knowledge, and simple human compassion. His first appointment was with Specialist Jennifer Walsh, a 22-year-old communications specialist who had been struggling with what her immediate supervisor described as attitude problems. Marcus had reviewed her file before the meeting and found a pattern of minor disciplinary issues that suggested deeper problems. Specialist Walsh knocked on his door at precisely 1,000 hours, entering with the rigid posture of someone expecting punishment. She was petite and blonde, with intelligent eyes that held a wariness Marcus recognized from his own younger days in the service. "Specialist Walsh, please have a seat. Would you like some coffee?" She shook her head, remaining stiffly at attention until Marcus gestured again toward the chair. "Relax, Specialist. This isn't a disciplinary meeting. I'm here to listen to whatever you want to tell me." It took several minutes of gentle questioning before Walsh began to open up. The story that emerged was unfortunately familiar. A young soldier dealing with financial stress, family problems back home, and the feeling that her superiors saw her as just another problem to be managed rather than a person with real concerns. "My mom's been sick for 6 months," Walsh explained, her voice cracking slightly. "The treatments aren't covered by her insurance, and I've been sending most of my paycheck home to help with medical bills. My sergeant keeps writing me about staying focused, but how am I supposed to focus when I'm worried my mom might die?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression sympathetic. "Have you looked into emergency leave or financial assistance through Family Readiness Group?" "I tried, but the paperwork is crazy complicated, and my sergeant said I need to stop making excuses and start acting like a soldier." The picture was becoming clearer. Walsh wasn't a problem soldier. She was a young woman dealing with a crisis who hadn't received proper support from her immediate leadership. Marcus made a note to have a conversation with her sergeant about leadership techniques. "Specialist, I'm going to connect you with someone from Family Services who specializes in exactly these kinds of situations. We'll also look into emergency hardship leave, so you can go home and spend time with your mother." Walsh's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You can do that? It's what we're here for," Marcus replied. "Being a good soldier doesn't mean you can't also be a good daughter. Let's figure out how to help you be both." After Walsh left, visibly relieved and carrying contact information for several support services, Marcus reflected on how differently this conversation might have gone just a month ago. Before his encounter with Colonel Mitchell, he might have given the young specialist some tough love speech about military priorities and personal responsibility. Now he understood that real leadership meant addressing the whole person, not just the uniform they wore. His second appointment was with Staff Sergeant David Kim, a 15-year veteran who was considering leaving the military despite being just 5 years away from retirement. Kim's supervisor had described him as burned out and negative, but Marcus suspected there was more to the story. Kim entered with the confident stride of an experienced NCO, but Marcus could see the exhaustion in his eyes. They talked for nearly an hour about Kim's concerns, budget cuts that had eliminated programs he'd worked years to develop, young officers who seemed more interested in checking boxes than actually leading soldiers, and a general feeling that the military he'd joined no longer valued experience and expertise. "I used to love this job," Kim said, staring out the window at soldiers conducting training exercises. "I believed we were making a difference. Now it feels like everything's about politics and appearances instead of actually taking care of people." Marcus understood the frustration. He'd felt similar disillusionment before Colonel Mitchell had shown him a different perspective on leadership and purpose. "Staff Sergeant, what if I told you there might be opportunities to be part of the solution instead of just watching the problems get worse?" Kim raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Colonel Mitchell has been reviewing our training programs and leadership development initiatives." She's looking for experienced NCOs who can help redesign these programs to focus on what actually works rather than just following outdated procedures. For the first time since entering the office, Kim looked interested. She'd actually listened to suggestions from someone like me. She'd listened to good ideas from anyone, regardless of rank. The question is whether you're willing to stick around long enough to help make things better instead of just leaving and letting someone else deal with the problems. By the end of their conversation, Kim had agreed to submit a formal proposal for improving the base's professional development programs. Marcus scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following week and made a mental note to mention Kim's expertise to Colonel Mitchell. His third appointment was the most difficult. Corporal Michael Stevens had been referred by the chaplain after expressing thoughts of self-harm following a difficult divorce and custody battle. Marcus wasn't a trained counselor, but he learned that sometimes the most important thing was simply listening without judgment. Stevens was a mechanic with 8 years of service and what should have been a promising career ahead of him. Instead, he sat in Marcus's office looking like a man who had given up hope. The divorce had been nasty, resulting in his losing custody of his 2 young children and facing significant financial obligations that would consume most of his military pay for years to come. I keep thinking about how much easier it would be for everyone if I just wasn't here anymore, Stevens said quietly. My kids would get my life insurance, my ex-wife could move on, and I wouldn't have to wake up every morning feeling like a complete failure. Marcus felt his chest tighten at the words. He'd known soldiers who had reached this point, and he'd seen what happened when they didn't get the help they needed in time. Corporal, I need you to understand something. Your children need their father in their lives, even if it's complicated right now. And your unit needs you. But most importantly, this feeling you're having right now, it's not permanent. Things can get better if you're willing to accept help. They talked for over an hour about practical steps, financial counseling, legal assistance through the base legal office, therapy through the mental health services, and connection with other soldiers who had faced similar challenges. Marcus also arranged for Stevens to be temporarily assigned to duties that would keep him around other people during his most vulnerable times. I want to see you again next week, Marcus said as Stevens prepared to leave. And I want you to promise me that if you start having those thoughts again, you'll call the crisis hotline or come find me immediately. Do I have your word on that? Stevens nodded, looking slightly more hopeful than when he'd arrived. Yes, Sergeant First Class. Thank you for listening. After Stevens left, Marcus sat alone in his office, emotionally drained from the intensity of the conversations. This was the part of his new job that Colonel Mitchell hadn't fully prepared him for. The weight of other people's problems, the responsibility of being someone's lifeline when they were drowning. His reflection was interrupted by a knock on his door. Come in. To his surprise, Colonel Mitchell entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a slight smile. I thought you might need this after your afternoon appointments. Marcus stood, but she waved him back into his chair and took the seat across from his desk that had been occupied by troubled soldiers all afternoon. How are you adjusting to the new role? She asked, handing him one of the coffee cups. It's more intense than I expected, Marcus admitted. These soldiers are dealing with some serious problems. I just hope I'm qualified to help them. You're more qualified than you think. Do you know why I chose you for this position? Marcus shook his head. I assume it was because of my experience as an NCO. Partly, but that's not the main reason. Colonel Mitchell sipped her coffee, studying him thoughtfully. I chose you because you understand what it's like to make mistakes, to face consequences, and to be given a second chance. That experience gives you credibility with soldiers who are struggling. She leaned forward slightly. Marcus, most of the soldiers who end up in serious trouble don't start out as bad people. They're usually good people who made poor decisions, often because they felt isolated, misunderstood, or unsupported. You know what that feels like? The use of his first name caught him off guard. In their few interactions since that morning in her office, she had maintained strict military formality. This felt different, more personal. When I saw you that night at Murphy's Tavern, she continued, my first reaction was anger. Here was a soldier, drunk and out of control, about to potentially ruin both our careers. But as I watched you the next morning, taking full responsibility without making excuses, I realized I was looking at exactly the kind of NCO we need more of. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Ma'am, I'm not sure I deserve that level of confidence. That's exactly why you do deserve it, she replied with a smile. Arrogance and overconfidence are what gets soldiers into trouble in the first place. Self-awareness and humility are what help them grow and become better leaders. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, both looking out the window at the base that had become so central to their lives. Marcus found himself thinking about the path that had brought him here, from that disastrous night at Murphy's Tavern to this moment of quiet understanding with his commanding officer. "Can I ask you something, ma'am?" Marcus said finally. "Of course. You mentioned that you had a commanding officer who gave you a second chance when you were a young lieutenant. What happened?" Colonel Mitchell's expression grew distant, as if she were looking back across years of memory. "I was stationed in Germany, 24 years old, and absolutely certain I knew everything about leadership. I made a decision during a training exercise that could have gotten people seriously hurt. Instead of owning up to my mistake, I tried to cover it up and blame it on equipment failure." She shook her head at the memory. "My battalion commander could have ended my career right there. Instead, he made me personally apologize to every soldier who had been put at risk by my decision, study leadership failures throughout military history, and write a 20-page paper on the importance of integrity in command. That must have been humiliating. It was. But it was also the most valuable lesson I ever learned about leadership. He showed me that being a good leader isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest about your imperfections and learning from them." Marcus nodded, understanding now why she had been so willing to give him another chance. "Is that why you're so focused on developing young leaders rather than just punishing their mistakes?" "Exactly. Every soldier we lose to poor decisions or lack of support is not just a personal tragedy. It's a failure of leadership at every level. Your job is to help prevent those failures before they happen." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Marcus, you asked earlier if you're qualified to help these soldiers. Let me tell you something. Specialist Walsh left your office today looking hopeful for the first time in months. Staff Sergeant Kim just submitted a proposal that could revolutionize our training programs. And Corporal Stevens called the crisis hotline instead of doing something irreversible." Marcus stared at her, not understanding how she knew about his private conversations with the soldiers. "I'm making my business to know how my people are doing," she explained. "And based on what I'm seeing, you're exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you were meant to do." After she left, Marcus sat alone with his coffee, processing the weight of her words. 3 weeks ago, he had been a bitter, angry soldier convinced that the system was unfair and that his career was over. Now he was in a position to help other soldiers avoid the same pitfalls he had fallen into. His computer chimed with an email notification. It was from Specialist Walsh, thanking him for his help and letting him know that she had been approved for emergency leave to visit her mother. The simple message filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Marcus opened a new document on his computer and began typing a proposal for a peer support program that would pair experienced soldiers with younger personnel facing personal or professional challenges. It was ambitious, and he wasn't sure if it would be approved, but he knew it was exactly the kind of initiative that could make a real difference in soldiers' lives. As the afternoon wore on, and the base began to wind down for the evening, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation with Colonel Mitchell and her observation about second chances. He had been given an extraordinary opportunity to turn his worst mistake into something meaningful. But more importantly, he had been shown a model of leadership that valued growth over punishment, understanding over judgment. Looking out at the soldiers walking across the parade ground, heading home to families and personal challenges and dreams for the future, Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility. Each of those soldiers was someone's son or daughter, someone who had volunteered to serve their country and deserved to be supported when they struggled. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "How's the new position going? You sound so much happier in your emails." Marcus smiled as he typed back. "It's exactly what I didn't know I needed. I'll call you tonight and tell you about it." As he gathered his things to leave for the day, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his perspective on leadership and service had changed. 3 weeks ago, he had seen the military as a system that chewed up good people and spat them out when they made mistakes. Now, he was part of an effort to change that system from within, to create an environment where soldiers could admit their problems and get help rather than hide their struggles until they became catastrophic. The walk to his car took him past Murphy's Tavern, and he paused for a moment outside the building where his life had changed so dramatically. The irony wasn't lost on him that the worst night of his career had led directly to the best opportunity he'd ever been given. As he drove home through the familiar streets around the base, Marcus carried with him a new understanding of redemption responsibility, and the power of believing in people's potential for growth. Colonel Mitchell had seen something in him that he hadn't seen in himself, and now it was his turn to look for that same potential in the soldiers who would come to him seeking help. The road ahead would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference in people's lives. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Marcus Chun looked forward to every day of that journey. 2 months into his new role, Marcus had settled into a routine that felt both challenging and deeply satisfying. His office had become a safe haven for soldiers dealing with everything from financial problems to family crises to questions about their military future. Word had spread throughout the base that Sergeant First Class Chun was someone who listened without judgment and helped find solutions rather than just offering empty sympathy. The peer support program he'd proposed had been approved and was already showing promising results. 15 experienced NCOs had volunteered to mentor younger soldiers, creating informal networks of support that caught problems before they became crises. Colonel Mitchell had praised the program in her monthly command briefing, noting a significant decrease in disciplinary incidents and requests for early discharge. But this Thursday morning brought a challenge unlike anything Marcus had faced since taking the position. Captain Williams appeared at his door at 0730, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of stress. "Marcus, we have a situation developing that the colonel wants you to handle personally. Can you come to the main conference room immediately?" The urgency in Williams' voice was unmistakable. Marcus grabbed his hat and followed the captain through the corridors of the headquarters building, past soldiers who nodded respectfully as they passed. Whatever was happening was serious enough to require immediate attention from the command staff. The conference room contained an unusual assembly of personnel. Colonel Mitchell, the base chaplain, the mental health officer, and 2 soldiers Marcus didn't recognize. The tension in the room was palpable, and Marcus could see from Colonel Mitchell's expression that they were dealing with something potentially catastrophic. "Sergeant First Class Chun, please sit down," Colonel Mitchell said, her voice carrying the weight of command authority. "We have a developing situation that requires your expertise with soldier welfare issues." She gestured toward one of the unfamiliar soldiers, a young man who looked barely old enough to shave, let alone serve in the military. "This is Private First Class Thompson from Bravo Company." He came forward this morning with information about a potential threat to base security. Thompson was clearly terrified, his hands shaking as he gripped a water bottle that someone had given him. His uniform was disheveled, and Marcus could see the telltale signs of someone who hadn't slept in days. "Private Thompson, why don't you tell Sergeant First Class Chun what you told us earlier?" the chaplain said gently. Thompson's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's about Rodriguez. Private Rodriguez from my unit. He's been talking about doing something to hurt people. Himself, maybe others. He's got weapons, and he's been acting really strange lately." Marcus felt his blood run cold. This was every commander's nightmare. A soldier on the edge of violence, potentially armed and dangerous. The fact that Thompson had come forward took tremendous courage, but it also meant they were dealing with an immediate threat that required careful handling. "When did you first notice changes in Rodriguez's behavior?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm and reassuring. "About 2 weeks ago. He got some bad news from home, something about his girlfriend leaving him and taking their kid. Since then, he's been drinking a lot, staying up all night, talking about how nobody understands what he's going through." Thompson looked around the room nervously before continuing. "Yesterday, he showed me this gun he bought off base. Said he was tired of people treating him like he didn't matter, that maybe they'd pay attention if something happened to him." Colonel Mitchell leaned forward. "Did he make any specific threats against individuals or locations?" "He mentioned the mess hall, said it was always crowded during lunch, and that people would notice if something happened there. But he also talked about just ending it all, like maybe he just wants to hurt himself." Marcus recognized the pattern immediately. Rodriguez sounded like a classic case of someone spiraling into despair, feeling isolated and powerless, looking for a way to make his pain visible to others. The fact that he was considering violence against others rather than just self-harm made the situation exponentially more dangerous. "Where's Rodriguez now?" Marcus asked. "He's supposed to be on duty this morning, but he didn't show up," Thompson replied. "His squad leader sent me to look for him, but I couldn't find him anywhere. That's when I decided I had to tell someone what he'd been saying." Colonel Mitchell stood and walked to the window, her mind clearly working through the various options and risks. We've already dispatched security personnel to Rodriguez's quarters and contacted the local police about the weapon purchase. But we need someone to try to reach him before this escalates further. She turned back to face the group. Marcus, I'm asking you to take the lead on trying to establish contact with Rodriguez. Your experience with soldiers in crisis makes you our best option for de-escalating the situation. The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a heavy blanket. One wrong move, one miscalculated word, and people could die. But he also knew that his months of working with troubled soldiers had prepared him for exactly this kind of moment. I'll need everything we know about Rodriguez's background, his service record, and details about his personal situation. Also, do we know if he has any close friends on base who might be able to help us reach him? The mental health officer spoke up. I pulled his file. 20 years old, from a small town in Texas, been in the Army for 18 months. No prior disciplinary issues, but he's been to the clinic 3 times in the past month for anxiety and sleep problems. His primary care physician recommended counseling, but Rodriguez never followed up. Marcus studied the information, looking for clues about how to connect with a young man who was clearly in tremendous pain. The pattern was familiar. Young soldier, far from home, dealing with personal problems without adequate support, gradually isolating himself until his thinking became distorted and dangerous. What about his battle buddy or roommate? Marcus asked. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. He doesn't really have friends in the unit. He's kind of quiet, keeps to himself mostly. I think he felt like nobody really knew him or cared about what he was going through. That was the key insight Marcus had been looking for. Rodriguez wasn't just dealing with personal problems. He was dealing with them alone, which had allowed his thinking to become increasingly distorted. The solution wasn't just to disarm him, but to help him feel connected and understood. Colonel Mitchell's phone rang, and she answered it quickly. After a brief conversation, she turned back to the group with a grim expression. Security has located Rodriguez. He's in his car in the parking lot behind the PX, and witnesses report seeing him with what appears to be a firearm. The room fell silent as the reality of the situation sank in. They were past the point of prevention. Now they were in active crisis management mode. I'm going to talk to him, Marcus said, standing up from his chair. Absolutely not, Colonel Mitchell replied immediately. This is a job for trained negotiators and security personnel. With respect, ma'am, trained negotiators don't understand what Rodriguez is going through the way another soldier might. He needs to hear from someone who gets it, who's been there. Marcus looked directly at Colonel Mitchell, hoping she would understand what he was really saying. He had been where Rodriguez was now, feeling isolated and angry, convinced that the system didn't care about him as a person. The difference was that he'd had someone reach out to him before he'd crossed the line into violence. After a long moment, Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly. You'll wear a vest, and security will be positioned nearby. At the first sign that the situation is deteriorating, you pull back immediately. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself walking across the parking lot behind the post exchange, wearing body armor under his uniform and carrying a radio that connected him to the command post Colonel Mitchell had established in the security office. His mouth was dry, and he could feel his heart pounding, but his mind was focused on the young soldier sitting in the blue sedan 50 yards away. Rodriguez was slumped over the steering wheel, and Marcus could see him talking to himself, gesturing animatedly at something only he could see. The signs of severe psychological distress were obvious, even from a distance. Marcus approached slowly, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. When he was about 10 feet from the car, he called out in a voice loud enough to be heard but calm enough not to startle. Rodriguez, it's Sergeant First Class Chun. I'd like to talk to you if that's okay. Rodriguez's head snapped up, and Marcus could see the fear and confusion in his eyes. The young soldier looked like he hadn't slept or eaten in days, and there was a wildness to his expression that spoke of someone who had lost touch with reality. Stay away from me, Rodriguez shouted. I know you're here to arrest me or throw me out of the army or something. I'm tired of everybody treating me like I'm nothing. Marcus could see the gun now, lying on the passenger seat of the car. Rodriguez's right hand was resting near it, though he hadn't picked it up yet. This was the critical moment when the situation could go either way. I'm not here to arrest you, Rodriguez. I'm here because I heard you're going through a tough time, and I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help. Help? Rodriguez laughed bitterly. Nobody wants to help. Everybody just wants me to shut up and follow orders and pretend everything's fine. Well, everything's not fine. Marcus took a small step closer, his hands still visible and his voice remaining calm and steady. You're absolutely right. Everything's not fine, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. What's going on? What's making everything so hard right now? For a moment, Rodriguez seemed surprised by the direct question. Most people, Marcus had learned, asked troubled soldiers how they were doing, but didn't really want to hear the honest answer. My girlfriend took my son and moved in with some other guy, Rodriguez said, his voice cracking with emotion. She said I was never around anyway, that the army was more important to me than my family. But that's not true. I was trying to build a future for them. Marcus nodded, recognizing the pain in the young soldier's voice. That sounds incredibly painful. How long were you together? 3 years. We were going to get married when I finished my first enlistment. I had it all planned out. Rodriguez's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Now, she won't even let me talk to my son on the phone. Says I'm a bad influence. Have you been able to talk to anyone about how you're feeling? Who am I supposed to talk to? My squad leader thinks I'm weak for being upset about it. The chaplain just wants to pray about it. The counselors want me to take pills and pretend everything's okay. Marcus could hear the isolation and desperation in Rodriguez's voice. This was a young man who had been trying to cope with devastating personal loss while maintaining his military responsibilities, and the system had failed to provide him with meaningful support. Rodriguez, can I tell you something? Something that might sound crazy. The young soldier looked at him suspiciously, but nodded. 2 months ago, I was sitting in a bar, drunk and angry, convinced that my career was over and that nobody in the army gave a damn about me as a person. I felt like everything I'd worked for was falling apart, and I was ready to do something stupid that would have ruined my life. Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. What happened? I made a mistake. A big one. And I thought that was the end of everything. But someone gave me a chance to turn things around, to find a way to use my experience to help other soldiers who were going through similar problems. Marcus gestured toward the headquarters building visible in the distance. That's why I'm here talking to you right now. Not because I'm better than you or because I have all the answers, but because I know what it feels like to think that nobody understands or cares. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the gun beside him. But you didn't lose your kid. You didn't have the person you love most tell you that you're worthless. No, I didn't. And I can't imagine how much that hurts. But I can tell you that the pain you're feeling right now, as bad as it is, it's not permanent. And there are people who want to help you through it if you'll let them. Like who? Rodriguez demanded. Who wants to help someone like me? Marcus thought about Colonel Mitchell, sitting in the command post and trusting him to handle this crisis. He thought about Thompson, who had risked his friendship to report his concerns. He thought about all the soldiers who had come to his office seeking help and found hope instead of judgment. Like me, he said simply. Like your battle buddy Thompson, who was brave enough to speak up because he was worried about you. Like Colonel Mitchell, who could have handled this situation by sending in security, but instead wanted someone to talk to you person to person. Rodriguez looked confused. Thompson reported me. Thompson saved your life, Marcus corrected, and possibly the lives of other people. He saw that you were in pain and that you were thinking about doing something that would destroy everything good left in your life. That takes a real friend. I don't want to hurt other people, Rodriguez said quietly. I just want the pain to stop. I want to feel like my life matters, like I matter. Your life does matter, Rodriguez. To Thompson, to your unit, to your son who's going to need his father as he grows up, even if things are complicated right now. Marcus could see that Rodriguez was beginning to listen, that the immediate crisis was starting to de-escalate. But the young soldier was still holding on to the gun, still teetering on the edge of a decision that would change everything. What if I give up the gun? Rodriguez asked. What happens then? Do I get kicked out of the army? What happens is that we get you the help you need. Real help. Not just someone telling you to toughen up or get over it. Counseling, legal assistance with a custody situation, support from other soldiers who've been through similar problems. Marcus took another small step closer. And you get the chance to be there for your son as he grows up, even if it's not the way you originally planned. You get the chance to show him that his father is someone who faced problems and got help rather than someone who gave up when things got hard. Rodriguez began to cry then, deep sobs that seemed to come from somewhere profound in his chest. Marcus could see the exact moment when the young soldier decided to choose life over death, hope over despair. Will you help me? Rodriguez asked through his tears. Every step of the way, Marcus promised. Slowly, carefully, Rodriguez picked up the gun and handed out the car window to Marcus, who accepted it with steady hands and immediately radioed the command post that the weapon had been secured. Within minutes, the parking lot filled with medical personnel, counselors, and support staff, all focused on helping Rodriguez begin the long process of healing. As Marcus watched the young soldier being led away to receive immediate psychiatric evaluation and care, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal achievement. This was what real leadership looked like. Not giving orders or demanding obedience, but connecting with people in their moments of greatest need and helping them find a way forward. Colonel Mitchell appeared at his side as the last of the emergency vehicles pulled away. "Outstanding work, Marcus. You may have saved multiple lives today." "Rodriguez did the hard part," Marcus replied. "He chose to trust that things could get better. I just helped him remember that he wasn't alone." As they walked back toward the headquarters building, Marcus reflected on how far he had come since that night at Murphy's Tavern. Then he had been an angry soldier convinced that the system was broken and that individual soldiers didn't matter. Now he was part of that system's effort to prove that every soldier mattered, that everyone deserved help when they struggled. The radio crackled with an update from the hospital. Rodriguez was stable, cooperative, and ready to begin the process of getting his life back on track. It would be a long road, involving therapy, legal assistance, and the support of fellow soldiers, but it was a road that led toward hope rather than tragedy. And sometimes, Marcus thought as he entered the building where his own second chance had begun, that made all the difference in the world. Any year had passed since that transformative night at Murphy's Tavern, and Marcus stood in his dress blues on the base parade ground, watching a promotion ceremony that filled him with quiet pride. Private First Class Thompson, the young soldier who had found the courage to report Rodriguez's crisis, was being promoted to specialist and receiving a commendation for his quick thinking and moral courage. Rodriguez stood in the front row of spectators, also in his dress uniform, clean-shaven and clear-eyed in a way that would have been unimaginable during those dark days in the parking lot. The past year had been difficult for him, involving intensive therapy, a structured custody arrangement that allowed regular visits with his son, and a gradual rebuilding of his sense of purpose and self-worth. As the ceremony concluded and the formation dispersed, Rodriguez approached Marcus with a nervous but determined expression. In his hands, he carried a small wrapped package and an envelope. "Sergeant First Class, I wanted to give you something," Rodriguez said, offering the package with hands that no longer shook. "It's not much, but I thought you should have it." Marcus accepted the gift, feeling the weight of a small picture frame inside the wrapping paper. When he opened it, he found a photograph of Rodriguez with a young boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Both were smiling broadly, standing in front of what appeared to be a playground. "That's my son, Miguel," Rodriguez explained, his voice thick with emotion. "We took that picture last weekend when he came to visit. I wanted you to see what your help made possible." The envelope contained a letter written in Rodriguez's careful handwriting, expressing gratitude not just for that crucial conversation in the parking lot, but for the ongoing support that had helped him rebuild his life piece by piece. Marcus read it quietly, moved by the young soldier's journey from despair to hope. "How are things going with the custody situation?" Marcus asked. "Better than I expected. Miguel's mom and I are actually talking now, really talking about what's best for him. We're not getting back together, but we're learning to be good co-parents. And Miguel knows his dad is someone he can count on." Rodriguez paused, looking out at the parade ground where other soldiers were going about their daily duties. "I also want to tell you that I've been thinking about staying in the Army. I know that might sound crazy after everything that happened, but this place saved my life. Maybe I can help it save someone else's." Marcus smiled, remembering his own decision to stay and fight to make things better rather than simply walking away from problems. "That doesn't sound crazy at all. Have you thought about what you'd want to do?" "Actually, I've been talking to some of the guys in your peer support program. They think I might be good at helping other soldiers who are dealing with family problems or personal crises. Someone who's been there and can understand what they're going through." The idea was brilliant, Marcus realized. Who better to help soldiers in crisis than someone who had been in crisis himself and found a way through it? Rodriguez's experience, properly channeled and supported, could become a powerful force for helping others. "I think that's an excellent idea," Marcus said. "Let's talk to Colonel Mitchell about ways to get you the training and opportunities you need to make that happen." As Rodriguez walked away, visibly more confident and purposeful than he'd been in over a year, Marcus reflected on how many lives had been touched and changed by the events that had begun with his own moment of poor judgment. The ripple effects continued to spread outward, creating positive change in ways he never could have anticipated. His reflection was interrupted by the approach of Colonel Mitchell, who had observed the ceremony from her position near the reviewing stand. She was accompanied by a tall man in a general's uniform whom Marcus didn't recognize. "Sergeant First Class Chun," Colonel Mitchell said, "I'd like you to meet General Harrison, the new division commander. I've been telling him about our soldier support initiatives." Marcus came to attention and saluted crisply. General Harrison returned the salute with a warm smile that immediately put Marcus at ease. "Sergeant First Class, Colonel Mitchell has been singing your praises. She tells me you've revolutionized how we handle soldier welfare issues on this base." "Thank you, sir. It's been a team effort involving many dedicated people." General Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of leadership attitude we need more of. I understand you've developed a comprehensive program that's being considered for implementation division-wide." Marcus glanced at Colonel Mitchell in surprise. He knew his programs had been successful locally, but he hadn't realized they were being evaluated for broader use. "Sir, we've had good results with our peer support and early intervention initiatives. The key has been connecting soldiers with problems to soldiers who've overcome similar challenges." "I'd like you to consider a new assignment," General Harrison said. "We're establishing a division soldier support center, and we need someone with your experience to help design and implement programs across multiple bases. It would mean a promotion to Master Sergeant and a chance to impact thousands of soldiers' lives." The offer was extraordinary, far beyond anything Marcus could have imagined when he'd started this journey. But as he looked around the base that had become his home, at the soldiers who had become his extended family, he felt a moment of uncertainty. "Sir, that's an incredible opportunity. Could I have some time to consider it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need. This kind of work requires people who are passionate about it, not just qualified for it." After General Harrison left, Marcus and Colonel Mitchell walked slowly across the parade ground, both lost in their own thoughts about the magnitude of what had just been offered. "You're conflicted about leaving," Colonel Mitchell observed. "I am," Marcus admitted. "This place gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. The people here became family. It feels wrong to abandon that." "Marcus, you're not abandoning anything. You're expanding it. Everything you've learned here, every technique you've developed, every relationship you've built, you'll be taking all of that and sharing it with soldiers who need help just as much as the ones here do." She stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Remember when you asked me why I was giving you another chance after what happened at Murphy's Tavern?" Marcus nodded. "I told you it was because someone had given me a second chance years earlier. What I didn't tell you was that the officer who helped me went on to become a general, and he spent the rest of his career creating programs to help soldiers like me. Like you." The implication was clear. Marcus had been given the opportunity to pay forward the kindness and understanding he'd received, not just locally, but on a scale that could affect thousands of lives. "There's something else you should know," Colonel Mitchell continued. "Rodriguez isn't the only soldier whose life you've saved this year. The Mental Health Office has documented a 40% decrease in suicide attempts and serious disciplinary incidents since your programs were implemented. That's not just statistics, Marcus. That's families who still have their sons and daughters, soldiers who still have their careers and their futures." As they resumed walking, Marcus thought about all the soldiers he'd worked with over the past year. Specialist Walsh, who had successfully completed her mother's care and was now thriving in her military career. Staff Sergeant Kim, whose training program improvements had been adopted base-wide. Corporal Stevens, who had not only overcome his depression, but had become one of the most effective peer counselors in the program. Each success story represented not just an individual transformation, but a ripple effect that touched families, units, and communities. The opportunity to expand that impact across an entire division was both thrilling and daunting. "There's one more thing," Colonel Mitchell said as they approached the headquarters building. "General Harrison was serious about this being your choice, but I want you to know that whatever you decide, you'll have my full support. This base will always be your home." That evening, Marcus found himself back at Murphy's Tavern for the first time since that fateful night. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was returning to the place where his lowest moment had occurred to contemplate what might be his highest achievement. The tavern looked exactly the same, but Marcus felt like a completely different person as he ordered a single beer and found a quiet table in the corner. This time, he wasn't drinking to escape his problems, but to celebrate how far he'd come. The bartender, the same man who had witnessed his encounter with Colonel Mitchell a year ago, approached with a friendly smile. "Haven't seen you in here for a while, soldier. How's life treating you?" "Much better than the last time I was here," Marcus replied with genuine warmth. "Much better." As he sat alone with his thoughts, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from his sister. "Heard through the grapevine that you might be getting promoted again. So proud of you, little brother. Dad would be too." The mention of their father, who had died during Marcus's third deployment, brought a wave of emotion. His dad had been a Vietnam veteran who had struggled with his own demons after the war, never receiving the kind of support and understanding that was available to soldiers today. In many ways, Marcus's work was a continuation of his father's fight, an effort to ensure that no soldier had to face their battles alone. His phone rang, and he saw Rodriguez's name on the caller ID. "Hey, Rodriguez. What's up? Sergeant First Class. I hope I'm not bothering you. I just wanted to call and say thank you again for today and to tell you something important." "What's that?" "I heard about the opportunity with General Harrison, about the division assignment." Marcus wasn't surprised that word had already spread. The military grapevine was remarkably efficient. "I wanted you to know," Rodriguez continued, "that you should take it. I know you're worried about leaving us behind, but you're not. Everything you taught us, everything you helped us build here, it's not going anywhere. And there are soldiers out there who need what you have to give just like we did." The words hit Marcus deeply, coming from someone who had experienced firsthand the difference that caring leadership could make. "Besides," Rodriguez added with a chuckle, "I'll be here to help carry on the work. Thompson too. We learn from the best." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the quiet tavern, surrounded by the ordinary sounds of people enjoying an evening out. A year ago, he had been consumed by anger and self-pity, convinced that his career was over and that the system was fundamentally unfair. Tonight, he was being offered the chance to help reshape that system for the better. The decision, when it came to him, was surprisingly clear. He would take the assignment with General Harrison, not because he was abandoning the work he'd started here, but because he was expanding it. The soldiers at this base would continue to be supported by the programs and people he'd helped develop. Other bases, other soldiers deserve the same chance. Marcus finished his beer and walked outside into the cool evening air. The base spread out before him, its buildings and lights representing thousands of individual stories of service, sacrifice, and hope. Tomorrow he would call General Harrison and accept the position. Tonight, he simply wanted to appreciate how far he'd come and how many lives had been touched along the way. As he drove home, Marcus passed the parking lot where he had talked Rodriguez through the worst moment of a young soldier's life. The space was empty now, just another parking lot, but he knew he would always remember it as the place where he had learned that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being willing to sit with someone in their pain and help them find a way forward. His apartment, once a sparse and lonely space, now felt like a real home. The walls were covered with letters from soldiers he'd helped, photos from unit events and ceremonies, and certificates recognizing his contributions to soldier welfare. Most importantly, there was a framed photo of him and Colonel Mitchell at the ceremony where his peer support program had been officially adopted as base policy. As he prepared for bed, Marcus thought about the phone call he would make to his sister tomorrow, sharing the news about his promotion and new assignment. She would be proud, he knew, but more than that, she would understand that he had found his true calling in life. The last thing he did before turning off the lights was to look at the picture Rodriguez had given him that morning. The image of father and son, both smiling and happy, represented everything that was possible when people were given second chances and the support they needed to rebuild their lives. 12 months ago, Marcus had been a broken man who had lost faith in himself and in the institution he served. Tonight, he was a leader who had learned that the greatest strength came not from never failing, but from learning how to help others rise after they had fallen. The journey from that night at Murphy's Tavern to this moment had been unexpected and transformative. What had started as the worst mistake of his career had become the foundation for the most meaningful work he had ever done. The woman he had accidentally pushed to the ground had become his mentor and the architect of his redemption. As sleep came, Marcus dreamed not of the past, but of the future, of the soldiers he would meet, the programs he would build, and the lives he would have the chance to touch. It would be challenging work, requiring all the wisdom and compassion he had developed over the past year. But it was work that mattered, work that honored the second chance he had been given by paying it forward to others who needed hope, support, and the knowledge that they were not alone in their struggles. In his dreams, Marcus saw a future where every soldier in crisis had someone like Colonel Mitchell in their corner. Someone who could see potential beyond mistakes, strength beyond weakness, and hope beyond despair. It was a future worth fighting for, and Marcus Chun was ready for the battle.